and welcome to Beebe Book Buzz, the program where your Wakefield librarians gather to tell you about the books that have inspired us lately. My name is Karen Stern, and I'm from the reference department at the library, and I'm here with my colleague Beth Radcliffe, also from the reference department, and with our assistant director, Jackie Powers. Today we have a lot of crime for you. We all have different kinds of crime to talk about. And I think we're going to start with a true crime one from Beth first. You ready?
Ready. So true crime is not my usual read, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's also, this is not what people usually think of as true crime. It's not blood and gore. It's not murder and rape. It's theft. So this is by Matthew Hart. It's called The Irish Game, a true story of crime and art, and it focuses on two brazen thefts from the same Irish mansion that includes, among its other artwork, a priceless Vermeer. So Hart goes into the, Hart goes in.
Wasn't there a Vermeer stolen from the gardener as well?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Yeah.
And he touches a little bit in his history of art theft on our gardeners being robbed. He also goes into the history of the estate. So it was a mansion built by Protestants in Irish Catholic country. So one theft was connected to the IRA. The second theft was done by this over-the-top, maybe over-the-hill gangster that liked to thumb his nose at the police. So he's a very interesting character. So again, he discusses the Isabella Stewart Gardner and how art theft has now become collateral in the criminal drug trade. It's really fascinating. And
drugs and arms.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So Hart is a journalist, but it's not dry writing. It's told in a pretty quick pace. The details don't bog it down. His characters, especially that of the gangster, are really well drawn, as are the police that are trying to figure out what happened through these various heists of the same paintings. They come out as individuals. And so readers that would like this book, people that have read Monuments Men or seen it by Robert Edson. There's also another DVD is Women in Gold, and there's a book that's related to it called Lady in Gold by Anne-Marie O'Connell. And then novels, especially The Gardener. There's the one by A.B. Shapiro called Art Forger.
Oh, yeah.
And then for the Vermeer IRA connection, novel again is The Music Lesson by Catherine Weber.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of Gardner heist books that I think
Yes,
if you've
there
read any
are.
of them, you would find
Right.
this interesting because it's all kind of one world. It's that world.
Yeah, he fits it nicely.
And there's a podcast, which I know, Jackie, you've been,
obsessed with.
the
Last
WBUR is doing a great podcast on, it's called Last Scene, like S-C-E.
No,
S-C-E-E-N.
Scene, like,
Sorry.
yeah.
Last Scene, which is all about, digging further into the Gardner heist.
It's really well done.
So there's a lot of stuff out there right now if you like that kind of true crime. So I'm going to talk about a book that reads like true crime but is not true crime, and is also a graphic novel. This is Sabrina by Nick Drnaso. It's hard to spell. Drnaso. And he was actually, this is the first graphic novel to be long listed on the Man Booker.
Wow.
So it's quite a statement to do that, and it says something about how powerful this is. And so I'll give you a little bit of story, but not too much. Sabrina is actually the person at the center of the story in a certain way, although she is not actually mentioned all that much because she goes missing. So first we see Ted, who is Sabrina's boyfriend, who comes to live with his old friend Calvin when Sabrina has gone missing. Then a gruesome video is released of her killing. And Drnaso takes us through kind of the effects of that internet experience on all of the people in her life, including Ted and Calvin by extension, and actually he becomes kind of a focus of some of it as well, and her sister Sandra a bit. So the crime itself is really upsetting, obviously, and they don't, I should say that that's not shown in here in any way. It's not drawn. But it's not really, the book isn't about the crime, it's about the after effects, and it's about how we are today. It's a very, very timely, important book in terms of the internet culture and what happens in these things. So, for instance, I mean, Calvin is kind of identified by conspiracy theorists at some point as harboring Ted, who hasn't been seen since, because obviously he's very depressed and upset by the whole thing. And it's just this sort of the internet-driven society, and there's the Drawn and Quarterly, who's the publisher of this, says shows the 24-hour news cycle and false flag conspiracy theories and how they feed our anxieties and encourage a lack of empathy for the world around us. So the way he does this is in the drawings themselves, and they're not. It's funny. I mean, there's not a lot to show, but that's kind of the point. They're not exciting, flashy, what you think of as, you know, kind of the superhero type of comics. They're very muted in colors.
Flat.
A lot of small frames that you can see here, and some of them are filled with really kind of mundane pictures that if you have to focus on each one, and it might be somebody, you know, walking down the hall like in his underwear, and you see the cat in one frame as he walks by. It's very, very. It pulls you into reality. It's almost as if you were on the set of like some television series that was about this subject, right? Or, you know, a documentary in a way. So, so he uses that to kind of make us feel both that the mundanity of it all, but also the disconnect between the characters and the way that the internet produces that disconnect. And so there's a sort of feeling of helplessness in it and lack of control over our world and our inability to talk to each other. But yet this endless kind of ability to connect with these crazy ideas, the conspiracy theories, which come from obviously nameless faces, people that we don't even know. You know, so it's this kind of juxtaposition of all those kind of things. So it's a little bit excruciating to read. I'm not going to lie. It's not you know, an uplifting read, but I think it's very powerful and very important, and I can see why they decided to put it on there. It just kind of, it gives you a feel of, it's funny, it's almost like you get to stand outside, you're looking at the internet without having to be on a computer, right? So you're looking at what we're all in the middle of every day, but it takes you one step back from that and lets you look at it in this way that involves drawn art instead of something on a screen.
And do you think that makes it more powerful, that it's not just prose?
Yeah, it does. It's funny. I think it's very powerful. He really knows what he's doing.
It looks very stark.
It is a little stark. I'm not, like I said, it's not something that I'm going to whitewash and say it's a lot of fun to read, but at the same time, it pulls you, it grabs you. So I would recommend it. I mean, it takes longer to read than I would have expected. I mean, it doesn't look like it's huge, but because of all those small frames, and some of those small frames, like there are these scenes where he's listening to one of Ted, the boyfriend, who's very depressed and just basically lies in his room all day, is listening to the conspiracy theorist on the radio, who is kind of modeled after. And he does the dialogue, or the monologue, I should say, really, really well. And each frame is filled with like a paragraph of text of this guy just going on and on and on and on. And you can see how Ted gets kind of sucked into that, and what it makes him start to feel about his own girlfriend. He knows the story, or he knows as much of the story as he can, yet he's still getting pulled by this voice, this bodiless voice coming from the radio. So spooky. It's real. Anyway, so that's Sabrina by Nick Drenasso. And I think from that we should move on to something a little bit lighter. Jackie has a little, I don't know if it's lighter, it's still murder, right?
Yeah. I read over this late summer, The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz, who I love. He wrote, his last book was Magpie Murders, that came out about a year ago.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic and very clever.
Yeah, wonderful.
And I think people might know him from television. He actually writes for Midsummer Murders. I don't know if that's still on. It was on for like 16 years or something absurd.
You can still watch it.
You can still watch it on Netflix.
And
Foyle's
Foyle's
War.
War.
Yeah, so a lot of British dramas.
Yeah.
That's his milieu. He also did the House of Silk, which was our Sherlock Holmes book. And he's very clever. He's very clever. And this book is no less clever. It opens with a woman who goes in at 11 o'clock in the morning to a funeral parlor and says, I want to plan my own funeral. And they're kind of like, okay, you know. And then 6 hours later, she's murdered. So the most clever part of the book is, so obviously there's this mystery. And the author actually puts himself in the book. He's a character in the book, and he's himself.
Does he write it in third person when he's a character?
No, it's all, the whole thing is written, yes, when it's about, no, actually, how is it written? It's all as if he were writing this book of this mystery. It's very meta. It's right. It takes a minute to kind of unravel. So
He likes that meta stuff.
yes,
He does.
well, because the Magpie Murders, there was sort of this mystery within a mystery thing going on to the
All
which
the
was so well
publishing
done
world.
that I wanted to actually read the mystery within mystery.
Yes,
Then
yes,
it turned
I
out that was
remember
not real. But this is done in kind of that same way. So you read it, you don't realize how he's doing it at first because you're just reading it and it's sort of this omniscient narrator, and then you realize that he's actually writing this. And he said, well, when I wrote that chapter, it was based on this, and so he ends up teaming up with this. He talks about working on Midsummer Murders and how he had or some TV adaptation of something, and he had a real police officer consult with him, and so this officer, Daniel Hawthorne, this detective, he has some backstory that you're not clear on, and I had not actually considered it, but I did just find out that this is the first in a series. So this Daniel Hawthorne is going to be a series. Is going to star in a series. So he shows up. He wants Anthony, the author, to write a book about him. He thinks his story would be his backstory would make a really good.
So
good
more
book.
meta.
It's more meta. It's
Wow.
very layered. But so they end up teaming up to solve this mystery somehow, and the author, he's really poking fun at this whole genre and kind of playing on all the sort of mystery tropes. And
because the last time he poked fun at the cozies.
At the cozies.
That's what Magpie Murders was all about.
and this one's kind of poking fun at a procedural, I think.
Right, at a
in
police
way.
procedural.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, interesting.
unpacking
Maybe I
it.
will read it.
It's good. It's really good. It's, like I said, really clever. Just you're till the end, even though you get to a certain point and you're like, oh, you're kind of thinking, I know where this is going. But then you kind of don't. It's just very smart and just so, I think it's just so different. It's such a different, this idea that you would be in your own book. And he
Yeah.
doesn't do it it's not in an egomaniacal way. He's very natural. It just reads very naturally. You can believe.
So this sounds like a mystery for maybe people like me who don't really enjoy
'cause,
mysteries.
I mean,
because it's a little different because it has a kind of a twist.
It does, and the mystery matters. I know in some books that you've liked that are mysteries, it's because the mystery's not the focal point. It's often the characters, or
Right,
whatever.
yeah.
But the mystery is kind of the point. But all this other stuff around it about him, inserting himself into the story, it's just so interesting in the way he does it.
Well, that is how some true crime is done. Like Anne Rule always is in
Right,
her
that's
book.
a
books,
good point.
right, and this is obviously not
Maybe he's
true.
poking.
but-
Maybe he's poking fun at true crime.
Well, he kind of is because the way that he's writing this, it's the book that he's writing within this book is a real crime.
Yeah.
So
Right. So he's-
it's
Oh, that's interesting.
really
so I didn't
interesting.
even think. I didn't know there was going
Lots
to be
of
that
layers.
whole
and he
connection.
just does it so well, and I really loved reading it, and I was pleased that he had come out because Magpie Murders just came out
Yeah, it was only a
it
year
wasn't,
ago.
It wasn't that long ago.
Was it a quick read then? I mean,
It's fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're sucked right in.
Right. Okay.
Right from the go.
a
So
little-
there's a little bit of gore, but it's done in such a way that it's very much. If you've ever watched that show, Midsummer Murders, it's totally. It's gory, but it's ridiculous. It's in that
Right,
same
yeah.
way.
Yeah.
You're reading it and you're just kind of, you know. It's not, I don't think it would be too much for anyone because it's couched in this kind of ridiculous premise.
Yeah.
So it's all very palatable. I don't think it would turn off anyone even if you can't read it. So
Well,
Great.
I think it's a little different, but the Jasper Fjord mysteries.
kind of. Yeah, there's not, I mean, he has a kind of fantasy,
Yes,
mystical
it's got
realism
much
element to it. that
Time travel.
This doesn't have
lots
any of that.
Right.
But the
that
tone.
plays with things, and
Yeah.
the author isn't in it. But
right. But the tone, I would
it's
say
really-
the tone is
yeah,
very similar. Yeah. So that was The Word is Murder.
The Word is Murder by Anthony
Anthony
Horowitz. Right. Great.
Oh.
So I think Beth has another
so-
another true crime to.
Yeah, so I know I said it wasn't what I usually read, but I got on a little kick, so I read a second one. And this one is, again, no murder, no gore, but it's not art, it's feathers.
I know, and I heard that I was like, feathers.
Feathers. I know. Who knew that was a thing?
No. So it's called The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural History Heist of the Century.
There you
Of
go.
the century.
No hype.
So it's an enthralling account of this bizarre crime. The author, Kirk Johnson, he served in the U.S. Agency for International Aid as the regional coordinator for reconstruction of Fallujah in 2005. He suffered from PTSD, so he sought out a meditative sport that he really liked, which was fly fishing. And he went to New Mexico, and his fly fishing guide told him about this this subculture of salmon fly fishing tires, and they tie the
Tires.
people who
Yeah,
tie
flies,
flies,
as opposed to on your car.
right. And they use priceless, colorful bird feathers, not to actually fish, mind you, because the salmon couldn't care less about what these lures look like.
the
Some
birds
fish do, but
exotic?
not the
I
salmon.
think trout might, but not.
Yes,
not,
trout care. So he tells him about this fly tying, and that it's an art. And he tells him about this one guy who went to the British Natural History Museum, stole a bunch of birds from there, all for this.
Stuffed birds. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
They weren't live.
they were not live, right? They were stuffed in drawers, and he unstuffed them into a suitcase.
Right.
So this happened 9 years ago, and he paints the portrait of this thief, and he tells all about the subculture, and he, like the other book, is great at portraying the thief, the subculture. There's a whole bunch of fascinating people in this subculture, and it's got the internet connection, which they now use for it, and allows him to go undetected, the thief. And then he also has the police that he also makes into these wonderful three-dimensional characters. He also goes into the history.
I was going to say, there's some history.
Yeah, and the first part of the history, he's going into a colleague of Darwin's, who's his last name is Wallace. So that, and Wallace is going out to get these birds. I mean, a lot of the birds that he stole were Wallace's, and it was in the 1800s when Wallace did this, so it was very hardship to get these things.
Sure.
So if you like true adventure, that part of it really clues in here. And then in the 1800s also, there was the fashion of the women's hats with entire birds on them or feathers, both of which contributed, along with other things, to the extinction of many birds and to the dearth of some of the other ones. So bird feathers become very valuable. Let me just indulge me in a little bit of a pun. This one has an ending. This one leaves you dangling. The ends are not tied up. So that's
sounds-
The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural History Heist of the Century.
This sounds like The Orchid Thief.
Very
Other
similar,
things
yeah.
that you don't think
Another
of as being
obsession.
stolen.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it is funny. It's almost like in this world we've gotten done with all the obvious stuff, and now we're focusing in on.
You know, I didn't think of this before, but it's also like the tulip book.
Oh, right. Yes. When people, this
Yeah.
idea that,
Of course, I can't remember the name or the
I know it,
author, but
yes.
They stole tulips.
there was a whole black market.
It was a whole black market back
Yeah,
in
and
the,
it was
in the late
tulips were worth-
1800s?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I know.
And
what
then
you're
it
talking about
crashed,
as well.
and people lost everything. I mean, some people lost everything.
I do
Right.
want to tell you about one other new book
Mm-hmm.
that's got the same thing about obsession with things. This one came out just this year, and it's called The Dinosaur Artist. Obsession, Betrayal, and the Quest for the Earth's Ultimate Trophy, and that's by Paige Williams. So again, it's got the science,
Right.
the conflict of
Oh, cool.
dinosaur bones being worth a lot. And
So is this about fossils?
it's
or
about
bones?
fossils. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Very cool.
I want to just put in a little plug here. Beth mentioned somebody, the author of this book, who came back from Fallujah with PTSD, and it kind of ties in. We are doing a little display this month, or a fairly good-sized display actually, of veterans fiction. Not just fiction either, just things related to veterans and veterans affairs, maybe you could say, but partly, obviously in November we celebrate
Right.
Veterans Day, and we wanted to create this partly because of that, but also because, and we will be having sort of classics, All Quiet on the Western Front and that sort of thing. But we wanted to highlight the fact that there are a lot of veterans who have returned in the last 10, 15 years from Iraq and Afghanistan, who are writing amazing fiction. And not just fiction, but a lot. I would say a lot of it is fiction. This first one I wanted to highlight, and these are just a couple of examples of the many that we can offer you. This is Nico Walker's Cherry, which is kind of a semi-autobiographical. It's a novel for sure, but it's, I would say, pretty heavily based on his own experience. So it takes on, modern war, in this case, Iraq, and its after effects, in this case, the opioid epidemic. So, coming home and what happens. It gets rave reviews. It's fantastic. His voice is so real and so raw and so kind of matter of fact about it all. It's supposed to be really good. I've started. I haven't finished it, but I would actually really like to read that one. And another one I want these are short stories by Will Mackin called Bring Out the Dog, and again he gets into kind of the everydayness of war, from the deadly boredom to the firefights to and everything in between. And again, the voice and the sense of being there is really strong, and he's a very good writer. So these are just a couple of examples of the kinds of things. I mean, we felt that these were really important because the fact is that only 1% of the population has actually served in conflicts in these modern conflicts that we're talking about. I mean, just a lot of people don't even know somebody who has been to war, and much less understand kind of what they went through when they were there. And so these are some ways that we can find out. So there's some really stellar literature here, and we will also have nonfiction as well. And we hope that you will come by and pick up some good books. So that's one plug. I think we had another plug while we're on the subject of crime. Jackie.
Yes. The nonfiction book group that I moderate, True Writ, we previously were meeting on Mondays in the evening. We're going to switch it up a little. We're going to move to Thursday, the third Thursday morning at 10:30. So the next meeting, I think, is November 15th. And we're going to be talking about Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. And it's the story of the woman who founded Theranos, which was this multi-billion-dollar company. I mean, I think she had a huge, record-setting IPO, initial public offering, when the company started doing really well. And come to find out, the technology that she was developing, which was for blood tests, I think primarily for diabetics, it was like the finger kind of pricking tests or something. The whole thing was a scam, basically, and the technology wasn't there, and it went on for years. I mean, she fooled people for years. So this is the story, and it was the guy who wrote it is the journalist who broke the story, and I think he won a Pulitzer Prize for it, I think, for the reporting of it. So we're going to be talking about that. We have copies at the circulation desk, so if you just come to the desk and ask for one. I hope it'll be a good talk. We're going to see if we can try meeting at a new time and gain some new membership.
And the new time again is?
10:30 in the morning on Thursday, November 15th, which is, I believe, the third Thursday.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you're going to be generally doing it on Thursdays?
I think we're going to stick with that time for a little while.
Right. Okay.
See what happens.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did you have any other crime that we have a few minutes left we could talk about?
I did read in a totally different direction from where we've gone. The last book in the trilogy, I'm pretty sure it's going to stay a trilogy, by Jason Matthews. The first was Red Sparrow.
Okay.
The second was Palace of Treason, and the third is The Kremlin's Candidate.
So this is kind of spy.
This
the
is
spy side of
espionage.
crime.
Yeah.
Espionage.
Yes,
yeah.
very much a spy espionage story, and it's very well done. Red Sparrow they made into a movie.
That's right.
I don't know if they'll do follow-up movies, but it's really well done, and I think the guy who wrote it, Matthews, either was with I think he was in the CIA. So it's very it's true to life. I think a lot of the tradecraft they talk about is real, and some of the situations are real. And Vladimir Putin's a character in it, and he's like a character. I mean, he's in it. Like they name him. It's not just this. A lot of books say, the president. You know who they mean,
right?
Yeah.
No, he's in it, very much so. And it's really well done. It's not for everyone. It's
In what way?
parts of it can be very graphic and very hard to read, and
Violent graphic?
violent graphic,
Right.
violent, and it's also not the happiest ending you're ever going to come across. I think it's one of those books where if it did have a happily ever after, you
wouldn't believe
wouldn't
it.
want it to. They would feel like a cop out.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, you just have to
You have to be ready for the grit.
You have to be ready for the grit, but it's really well done. He's an excellent author. He does, and the characters have built really well over the 3 books, so you're pretty attached.
Good.
So I do strongly recommend. You do have to read them all and read them in order. Don't
Yes.
jump in.
No.
Be confused.
No, that's definitely a
Yeah.
series, a real series. I'm going to just really quickly say to everybody that
can't wait.
everybody's all dither over there on the couch. It's Town of French's new one, The Witch Elm, has come out, and I'm like that far from being done. I'm not quite finished, but I pretty much know how it ends. And
It's hard not to just sit here and read it, right?
I will just say it's not what. It's something different a little bit. It's not the Dublin Murder Squad. Right. Sort of it is, but it isn't. It comes from a different point of view. You don't hear it from the detective's point of view. You're hearing it from more the victim's point of view. Well, obviously they're not dead, but but yeah, it's a civilian. Let's put it that way. So go if you're a Town of French fan and you've already read all the rest. Don't go in expecting exactly the same, but do go in expecting a pretty good ride because it really takes you along.
Is it still a procedural though, or?
Oh yes.
It's still okay.
Well, yes, although you're
Just
not
from
getting
not-
you're
yeah,
not
yeah.
getting it from the
police
detective's point of view.
perspective, right, okay.
So, I'll just leave it at that.
Very
and-
excited.
and highly recommend it. And I think that's about all we have time for today. I really appreciate you joining us today on Beebe Book Buzz, and we will be back next month with more.